Hi there, everyone. I am back with another tactical tutorial here for Grand Tacticians, the Civil War. Take a look at this. Wait, it's not playing. All right, now you can take a look at this as it actually plays through. But the numbers there are kind of indicative for the situation I have in mind for this video. That was probably incomprehensible to about 98% or so of you. That's okay. If you stick with the video, you'll see what I mean. But the big idea here in this video is to go through some semi-advanced, and that might be generous for the complexity of what I'm gonna put forward here in these two videos. But unlike the kind of tactical matchup video that I did previously, this one's gonna go a little bit more in depth. If you hate micro-intensive tactics, this is not the video for you. I am going to briefly go over, and maybe I'll pause this right here so that you have an opportunity if you want to escape this video soon. Let's see if we can do it. Yeah, if you want to get out of this video soon, I'll just show you the kind of main takeaways. Uh, but the two tactics I intend to talk about are the horse artillery kite. If you're unfamiliar with kiting in kind of real-time strategy battles. I mean, I'm most familiar with it from uh, Total War and specifically the Warhammer games that have come out of Total War. The idea with kiting is that you have ranged units that attack at units with less range and they run away before they end up in melee. And the other tactic is the flank overload. So if you just pause the screen here and read through my notes, you don't have to listen to me talk about it. There are other things, and I am going to show you some specific videos here where I apply parts of these, but I'll preface all of this by saying I have not made a video where I tried to do horse artillery kiting and a flank overload for the purposes of showing you how they work. I'm kind of just jumping around to different videos where you can see elements of it, and I'll explain how they work. The horse artillery kite, the idea is basically you're leapfrogging backwards, but you want to use horse artillery. You want to put it up front as close as you can to the enemy without being hit by them, and you withdraw if they end up pursuing. Otherwise, you pursue them and you continue to shoot at them. That's the tactic in brief if you don't want to stay for the whole video. The flank overload is kind of exactly what it sounds like, but you put the majority of your forces on one flank to overwhelm an opponent's. If you need a percentage, I'll make up a percentage and I'll say you put 75% on one flank, you hold 25% back to defend the other, to delay maybe a counterflank movement by in this case, the AI. It might be the only opponent we ever have in Grand Tacticians, the Civil War. So there it is. If you're ready to exit the video, that's fine. If you're going to stay with it, the next two parts of the video are, I'm going to remind us why we're doing these. I'm connecting tactics back to strategy that I talked about in a previous video. And then I'm going to talk about how these tactics work in detail and give you some examples from battle reports I've already posted. Some time ago, I don't remember how long ago it was, I did a tutorial video on how you could spend the first 9 months or so of the spring 1861 campaign. I think I did so probably focusing more on the CSA side than the USA, because I think the CSA side in general is more challenging. And so if you like a challenge, that might be the route that you take. And it also allows the greatest amount of originality from the campaign perspective. I think you're less tied to history when you start with the Spring '61 CSA campaign. And I think that's still the greatest promise of this game, although there's lots of other promise in it. In that video, if you didn't watch it or if you don't recall, the argument I made is that you should go small, I think is the phrase I ended up using. And what that meant in practice, I guess this video would make a little better watching if it were playing. Amateur productions do go like this. It meant recruiting minimum-sized infantry and cavalry brigades and maximum size horse artillery battalions. And the reason was that if you try to jack up your forces with full-sized infantry and cavalry brigades, you don't have the supply initially to do that easily, and you're going to cause prices to spike, and it's going to be a real shock to your finances, and it's going to lead to a drastic escalation of the debt. Keep also in mind that as I'm making this tutorial in the autumn of 2021, when I made that one, I think the game had I think it just went to 1.0, and most of the video and the overwhelming amount of my experience was from the early access version of the game. But in the iteration of the game in which I did that video, and it's largely still true even for the current iteration here in late October of 2021, you can incur a lot of debt early on, and you kind of have to match the AI's buildup. So the general idea was that by recruiting relatively understrength infantry and cavalry brigades, there were advantages to doing that, and I explained it all in that video. You can go to it if you want, and it should become clear there. It minimized the financial impact. It didn't overwhelm the nation's economy by demanding much more of the supplies than could be produced. And the horse artillery battalions kind of fit into all of that because they require relatively small numbers, and they attempt to substitute firepower in the form of artillery for the firepower of an individual's musket. And then as time goes on, you move through the summer and the fall of 61 into the winter of 61, 62. If you research the right technologies, you should be able to upgrade your weapons. My recommendation then, it's still my recommendation now, is that you focus on upgrading first your horse artillery battalion weapons. The cost, when I looked at it in that video, and I'm shooting from memory here, it's about a month ago, I think you could upgrade about 12 or 14 horse artillery battalions for the same price that you could upgrade the rifles of one of your infantry brigades. Although I think I was using pricing data from January of 1863 when I actually went in and looked at that, because I'm also doing a long-term campaign to see how the economy works over the long term. Even if that's not perfectly correct and the ratios are slightly different, the point is you can max out your horse artillery battalions with some of the great, I would say, early artillery that you're going to need, and really it's the greatest artillery that horse artillery can take. Those are 10-pound Parrots and 3-inch rifles, and I would say as backups, if those are not available, you can always go with the 12-pound Napoleons or the 14-pound James. Those are adequate substitutes. But they don't require a lot of men to staff them, and they use mobility and range and accuracy to make up for some of their numbers. So anyways, I'm going on longer than I should here about this, but the other reality you're going to have to deal with, particularly in the 1861 spring CSA campaign, I would say for at least the first 6 to 9 months, is you're going to be outnumbered, and frequently on the order of 2 to 1. Horse artillery kiting can help with some of that, and depending on how the AI responds, it can actually help with a lot of that. The other tactic in the second, kind of last part of this video, is going to talk about the flank overload, and that allows you to ignore a good portion of your adversary's numbers in the name of concentrating your forces against a few of theirs, so that while you're outnumbered on the battlefield overall, you're never really outnumbered in the firefights, and those tend to be what matter. All right, that's the second part of this video. The third part I'm going to start now is about how you actually do horse artillery kiting and the flank overload. Alright, so I've had this video playing in the background while I've been droning on here for a while. And what it's showing you, well, it's showing you a couple things. You can't really see it because I don't have a video specially made to show you horse artillery kiting. But I did kite on the left. When this battle started, I was severely numbered. If you did what I said at the beginning of this video and took a look at those numbers, I think I'm outnumbered 2-1 or slightly more than that. And the reinforcements that are supposed to show up and aid me, I'm pretty sure they never show up. So these are long odds. What I did in this video is I sent the horse artillery up. If you can see where the railroads meet up, kind of by that one lone building before it curves and goes over the river, I sent my horse artillery initially up there to pepper their forces which were in the city across the river, and I successfully distracted some but not all of their brigades to come and chase me. What I did after that was gradually draw them back. Those horse artillery battalions are mostly horse artillery battalions. The AI obliged me here by dividing their forces, and so that's going to give me an opportunity to fight them piecemeal, because the force on the left, the one that really is the center of the screen right now, that's their left. Well, that's my left, their right. They are numerous. I think when I actually looked at their numbers, they're about as large as my entire infantry force. But they're separated from the force on the right, which is chosen, unfortunately for them, to go across a ford, which I've occupied on high ground with a finished railroad that I'm using as hard cover to shoot down into them. Right, that ford there impedes their movement speed. I believe it lends them no cover at all. They end up getting butchered. So this is a particular application of kind of one tactic, but both of them. But I did do the horse artillery kiting here. In general, though, because I am going to bring in other videos, and I want to give you some general advice you can apply elsewhere. When you're going to do the horse artillery kite, first step is going to be use your cavalry to find the enemy forces on your map. Once you've done that, you got to make a decision based on your intelligence reports. If you appear to be significantly outnumbered, I would say at that point, draw your cavalry back to about where your horse artillery is going to first line up to start shooting at the enemy. We'll talk about how you do that later. If you have a numerical advantage, or you just like to risk things, you can take what cavalry you have and you can run them around the map, capturing victory points and capturing the map entry points, which will likely, if you take them from the enemy, you're shutting off supply and reinforcement avenues. I would say if the numbers are pretty close, but you think the battle may go long, several days, it might make sense to invest a good deal of your cavalry in capturing these early. If you're severely outnumbered, maybe facing an aggressive general, or just a situation where you need to survive an all-out onslaught. I will have a video here of where the two armies kind of, I'll say spawn in, that's not really what happens, but they begin in very close proximity to one another. You're not going to have the time to do that, and you're too outnumbered. So you're going to have the cavalry close, because it's going to have to play a supporting role. I'm going to switch to a different one now. Maybe I'll come back to this map, but I want to show you kind of what your infantry should be doing while your horse artillery is kiting. So this might be the map where I carried out probably my most successful horse artillery kite. And you can actually see that, unbeknownst to me, I was actually following the steps that I would later recommend, which is to send out your cavalry to find the enemy army. And on this map, if I recall correctly, I'm significantly outnumbered, and I'm waiting for reinforcements, which should equalize the forces. Now you see, the infantry here in the overnight has done what I was going to suggest next you do, which is that your infantry began fortifying a strong defensive position. It's beyond the scope of this video for me to talk about choosing good ground to defend and attack, and also good ground that can allow you to transition from defense to attack. I think it's so important, so long, it's going to have to be its own separate video. In this video, you can see what I do. I try to use the open field, build up breastworks when I have an overnight, build up level 2 parapets and fortifications behind a wooded area that's going to force the enemy to either move slowly and get fatigued coming through the forest, or they're going to bottleneck to the left of the screen where we are right now. They're going to have to come through that pass, and I think I have some level 2 parapets. I got some level 2 parapets, I got some breastworks, and I got a big open field they got to come to in order to get me. Again, I'll talk about cover, terrain, attack, and defense, and all that stuff in a different video. But in this one, you can see that I'm starting to do that. And right here, right now in this video, I'm getting my artillery ready to move. When I constituted these armies, I did not do it with the intention of creating a complete horse artillery division. I should have. I didn't. This campaign was not played optimally, as I don't think any of mine have been played as optimally as I could, especially in retrospect. So there is one artillery battalion in there that is not horse artillery. While the infantry is setting up their defensive position, it's time for, I'll say, the other parts, the horse artillery, the cavalry, and any skirmishers that you might be willing to send forward to go and do your thing. In this video, it shows an example of a corps with a single artillery division. I'm thinking that probably a smarter way to compose some of these corps is to have 2 divisions for greater flexibility and for greater rapidity of movement, but 1 is still okay. You got to make a decision about what you're going to do with that 1 division. And I think the 2 choices are basically A, put the division between the enemy infantry blobs, which is what I do at the beginning of this video, or B, put them on one of the flanks. Terrain is going to dictate a lot of this, where you choose your defensive position, victory points, like a whole bunch of things are going to affect what you choose to do. Again, I'm going to go in the center here, and one of the advantages of placing the horse artillery kite between the infantry blobs is that as you leapfrog backwards and as you retreat, you're retreating towards friendly infantry who can come up and stop any pursuers who are tightly pressing your retreat. Now, what you should do with your cavalry and infantry, particularly if you're really outnumbered, I would say, sorry, by infantry I mean skirmishers. You want to send your skirmishers up, unless you have house rules to maybe not use them or not send them out of bugle range. You can see the bugle range, it's fairly close. If you don't have any self-imposed house rules like that, send your skirmishers up and your cavalry up on the flanks and just behind your horse artillery. If you're right between the 2 infantry blobs, again, you can withdraw towards your friendly infantry, or you can withdraw towards the flank and try to divert the enemy infantry away from your main force if you want time to finish constructing your fortifications. I think I could fast forward this one actually to... Alright, so here... Alright, we can talk about target priority here in this video. So when your horse artillery gets in position, what are they doing? My recommendation is first, if you can afford to, focus on the enemy artillery. It should be, if you've done the spacing correctly, the only enemy unit that can hit your artillery. And because they're likely moving in a column, that means that if you do the spacing right, you look at the distance cones of hopefully your upgraded rifled guns, you'll be able to have all your horse artillery fire at 1 enemy artillery battalion. So while on average I'll say that they're about twice as large as a horse artillery battalion, you can see in this example, I think I have 4 artillery battalions there. Right now they're shooting at an infantry brigade. I don't remember if this is after they broke. I think that this is maybe after they broke a artillery battalion that was kind of leading the column. But if you take away their range advantage, that improves your long-term prospects. If the short term is so hairy, though, that you're not worried about their artillery accumulating advantage over a long, drawn-out fight, then you're going to have to switch to the lead infantry brigade. And I would recommend, whether you're shooting at their artillery to take away their range advantage or their infantry to try to break up their infantry advantage, try to concentrate your fire, all of you, against one of the enemy. Because you're looking to break off units that are not going to be able to engage your main infantry line, which should be behind this unit. If you're on the flank rather than in between, and this army or this division here of horse artillery starts in between, if you're on the flank, you're also in a good position. You're reasonably close, and you present the AI with a dilemma. If they send infantry after you, they will be too slow to catch you. You just simply limber up and you pull away. Then you unlimber and shoot once you're at a safe distance, and the infantry they send after you is never going to be fast enough to catch you, unless they send out skirmishers or some other kind of special scenarios. All right, maybe actually here we're seeing what happens when they have a artillery battalion leading their column. And this is one of the reasons why you want to keep cavalry and skirmishers close, because dismounted loose formation cavalry and skirmishers have really good matchups against artillery, right? Regardless of whether it's horse artillery or regular artillery, those are generally favorable matchups because you have a lot of guys shooting in who are hard for the artillery to hit back. I covered that in that other video on unit matchups. If they decide to pursue you, though, and I think we're going to see, I mean, you know, spoiler alert, guess what? That cavalry brigade shreks that artillery battalion. But I think later you're going to kind of see where some of my problems kick in. Yeah, they're right around here. I think they're a little bit after here, where the Union Brigade, maybe at the bottom of the screen or the one on the road, actually gets the jump on some of my horse artillery in the field there. But if you're stationed on the flank and they pursue you, you can kite. If they choose to ignore you, then you have the advantage of being on the flank that you can enfilade them twice, once as they come towards you, and then they're eventually going to be kind of in a straight line, not quite perpendicular, but close to it, depending on where your infantry line is. And then they're going to pass you as they go to engage your infantry line, and then you can enfilade them in the back, and you can continue to follow them and shoot them at relatively close range. I don't think I've said anything about range yet. As with so many other things in this game, it matters. When you're in the stage, when you're dueling their artillery, if you've taken the rifled guns with that great accuracy and range, I would say generally try to engage them at that maximum range. This is actually one of those rare kind of maps where the AI had a good overnight move, and they moved their second army. They also had two armies like I did, and we were both waiting on a group of reinforcements. And they got the other army kind of behind me, and so they were threatening to get in the flank and the rear of that horse artillery division, or mostly horse artillery division that you can see on the screen now. So anyways, being on the flank is not a bad idea either. If you've done what I said about moving dismounted cavalry up and skirmishers up, they can engage those infantry brigades and their skirmishers as they get closer. In terms of range, I mean, if you want to play it ultra conservative and don't want to lose any horse artillery, probably 1,000 yards is more than conservative enough. I think the best rifles I've seen for the CSA, besides getting the I forget the name of the 600-yard one at the moment. It'll come to me. But the CSA has some rifled muskets in decent quantities. They go up to 500 yards. So if you're 1,000 yards away, if the enemy has 500-yard range on their rifles, and if the AI is able to figure out how to quickly kick out skirmishers, which will close that gap quickly with your artillery, if you want to play it safe rather than sorry, right, there are order delays, 1,000 yards is fine. If you're willing to be a little bit more risky with it, I would say you could probably get in around 600-700 yards, especially if you have, 5-6 artillery battalions shooting into an infantry brigade. They might be able to focus fire down one of your horse artillery battalions, but the rest would be able to shoot and scoot out of there. One of the many great things about horse artillery is that if you lose a battalion, it's not the end of the world. And I talk about this in the video when I look at the cost, and I'm going to do this again in a different video. But the size, right, the manpower lost is insignificant. So if you're manpower strapped overall, not the end of the world. And if you're cash strapped, it costs relatively little to recruit and even upgrade these units. So losing one is not going to break the bank. It's not the end of the world. You don't want to lose all of them because you're going to lose the other advantages that are conferred by having this horse artillery kite. But if you want to play it a little risky, and sometimes, risky things don't work out, it's not that big of a loss for you. And so I think the risk reward is that you can kind of tempt getting a bit close. But the reason why I'm suggesting you take long range rifled guns, so you don't have to get close. And they have excellent accuracy, or I don't know statistically, but they have very good accuracy or better whenever they are firing. Assuming that you're satisfied with how the range duel went, and if you're throwing all of your horse artillery battalions against isolated artillery battalions of the enemy, you should be winning eventually those shootouts. If you, I know that some people don't want to take those shootouts because they think, well, all right, so I rout the enemy artillery guys off their guns, but the AI is just going to send skirmishers up to man those guns. That's true, but there are several benefits to that. If the AI infantry brigades are using their skirmishers to man artillery that's been vacated, that means that they don't have skirmishers to counter your skirmishers, which leads you potentially to have an advantage, at least in the long term, in the skirmisher versus infantry brigade, or in the, I think, more clearly favorable matchup of skirmishers versus enemy artillery. Also, it's my understanding, but I need to find evidence, and this is another video I need to do on the unit pref files. But I believe, if it's in there or somewhere else, that infantry skirmishers who man artillery do not operate it as effectively as trained infantry battalions. So there are those considerations. Once you've focused down the enemy artillery as much as you can in the situation you're in, you could see the situation developing that I'm dealing with in this battle. It's time to focus on the infantry. And my advice here is to start to pull towards one flank, especially as you get closer to your infantry line. You don't want to have to shoot through your friendly infantry to hit their infantry. So I would say start withdrawing toward a flank or two, and then focus firing all of your artillery into the flankmost enemy infantry battalion. And you want to try to break that off and then move into the next flankmost enemy infantry battalion. As you're doing that, pretty much the horse artillery kiting has run its course. Whatever it can do in terms of pulling enemy infantry brigades away from the fight, exhausting them, breaking their range, breaking their infantry brigades, it's probably done what it can, and it should just concentrate on shooting the enemy infantry brigades that are approaching or in firefights with your line as best it can. Remember that you can do this regardless of whether you're outnumbered or not, but I feel like when you're outnumbered, your options are a bit more limited, and so breaking off some of the enemy's army while losing none of yours is one of those things that can even the odds on a map where you are outnumbered, which, according to my strategic advice, you may well very be throughout 1861 and maybe even thereafter. So that was long-winded, as I tend to be, and I'll turn to the next tactic, which I think is a little bit easier, and I just do not have a good video anywhere of this tactic, but this one is okay, and that is the flank overload. So what happens in this video, and it kind of shows the flank overload, you'll see that the left flank is not particularly strong for attack. I have a level 2 parapet there. I have some woods, so there's some cover and concealment. I'm going to get some cav out on the flank. There's going to be a bunch of horse artillery, but there's going to be relatively little infantry. And I think, again, I'm fighting here at something of a disadvantage. I don't remember what it was, 20, 25, maybe 30%. Maybe not that much, but I'm pretty sure numerically I am underpowered in this video. But there is a push I do on my kind of right center, their left center, which kind of shows how an overloaded flank should work. While this is playing through, I'll talk through the steps of what you might want to do. And remember, this is something you can still do when you outnumber the opponent. And in some ways, it's even easier to do then because you're going to have more forces for defense, which will make a kind of counter flank by them more difficult to execute. So, as with the horse artillery kite, your first step here is to use your cav to find the enemy army, right? Whether it's a corps, all the corps in an army, something like that. And if you have enough cav, try to find out where the ends of their lines are. All I can say in this video, without going into the other one on terrain and cover and attacking, is that you need to make a decision if you're going to do the flank overload, which flank you're going to overload, right? Basically, which one you're going to attack and which one you're going to brace on. I would say lead this with your horse artillery. Now, they may have been kiting if you also employed that tactic. In this particular battle, our two armies spawned too closely together. There is no real time to do a whole lot of that. All right, that happens. I would recommend, though, that you get your artillery, whatever it is, in a place where it can start peppering the flankmost infantry brigade of the flank you're going to attack. In this tactic, the idea is to rout the infantry of the enemy as quickly as possible. Long-range shootouts with enemy artillery, when you get to, say, I don't know, make it less than 1,000 yards, really, you need to start switching focus to the infantry fight and winning that. And then once your infantry does, they or the cavalry or skirmishers will be able to take care of the enemy artillery. So have your artillery start concentrating on the most isolated, the flankmost unit of the enemy infantry. Your infantry, while that is going on, should be positioned in a kind of pre-attack position where they're pretty clustered. It can be in one line or it can be in two successive lines. I don't have a strong preference here. I can see the advantage of two successive lines to carry this out. As they end up forming up and moving to their position, they should kick out skirmishers. And those skirmishers, along with cavalry, which should be placed on your flank and maybe moved around to the rear of the enemy line, should be dismounted, put in loose formation, and should start moving in on the flank and rear of the flankmost infantry brigade. Your skirmishers should also move up and try to engage the 1, 2, or 3 flankmost infantry brigade units. The skirmishers, so in this example, look, the push is mostly on my right, their left. That's mostly where it happens. What you should try to do is using this example, use your rightmost skirmishers or your flank that's to be attacked most skirmishers, wrap them all the way around. Don't try to engage, but bring them far enough around that they can get behind the infantry brigade on the flank. Have the second flankmost on your side engage the flank of that infantry brigade, and have a third skirmisher detachment move up and engage it from the front. Whichever way the infantry brigade is pointed, that skirmisher unit should go prone. Because what the skirmishers and the cavalry who are dismounted and in loose formation are doing is they're trying to draw the fire and fix that infantry brigade in position right before the infantry brigades you're going to send in go in. Basically, you want your infantry brigades to go in while not under fire. While that is happening and the skirmishers and cav are moving to their position, you got to figure out what to do with your artillery now, because most likely your skirmishers and cav are going to obstruct line of sight to the flankmost infantry brigade. If you can, shoot at other infantry brigades on that flank. If you cannot, due to terrain or other considerations, limber them up, move them across your line, and put them in a position to help defend your weak flank, or your kind of anvil part of your line. Excuse me here. And if you can set them up in a position that they can quickly pack up, limber up, and withdraw if they get pressed, that would be great. But the artillery's role in this has more or less done its most significant damage, and now it's going to move into a very much a supporting role. Decide what your artillery is going to do. Now, with your skirmishers and cav engaging the flank you're going to attack, it's time to send in your infantry brigades. Remember that I think it's the control and right mouse button. You can set waypoints for movement, but you want to set a waypoint for your flankmost infantry brigade to try to wrap around the enemy line without being engaged by any of it. Have the second flankmost engage the flankmost enemy brigade in its flank, and then finally have the thirdmost on your line engage that brigade from the front. As with the skirmishers, whichever brigade of yours is getting shot at by the enemy infantry, I'd encourage you to just move up and go prone, because the damage is going to come from the other units who are not taking most of the fire. And the reason why you engage on three sides like that is no matter how the enemy infantry brigade changes its facing, it's always going to be engaged in one and probably two flank. It's going to be getting fire on at least one or two flanks, if not a front, a flank, and its rear. All of those are going to impose significant morale penalties. And they're not going to be able to keep up a prolonged firefight. And the reason why you go prone when you're taking fire, whoever's kind of receiving the fire from the infantry, the enemy infantry brigade, is because you're just looking to reduce casualties and continue to fix that unit in place while the other two brigades do the damage. I said this was micro-intensive. Once those move orders have been given, and they should be given first to the unit that will have the furthest to travel, so that all your brigades show up as close to the same time as they can, you should also switch targets for your skirmishers and your cav, because they now need to occupy other brigades who may be trying to address your flanking maneuver. And you want to address them and fix them in their positions in a shootout. Feel free to go prone, use cover, because you're just trying to delay them while you get that 3v1 in infantry brigades on their flank. The rest of your attacking brigades, I would say, should either be held in reserve or can start to, not tenuously, but start to maybe probe the second flankmost infantry brigade of the enemy. But I would not say go crazy, and feel free to go prone if you have to. The 25% or so of your infantry brigades you've elected for defense should have all the while been choosing good ground and constructing entrenchments with the purpose of delaying an enemy counter flank attack into your weaker flank. And the artillery should probably be sitting even further off to the flank of that to present the enemy AI with a dilemma: either chase your kiting artillery or continue into your entrenched infantry, taking flanking and enfilade fire from your artillery the whole time. Once you've broken off the flankmost enemy infantry brigade with your 3v1, move on to the next ones. If the infantry brigades who initially engaged are in pretty safe morale conditions, they can move on. And now you're kind of thinking of this as leapfrogging down the enemy line. skirmishing infantry and dismounted loose formation cav should always be the first ones to engage, probably prone with both of those, the enemy infantry brigades to try to halt their movements and allow you to get nice 3v1s. If one or more of your initial infantry brigades are too beat up, have them kind of conduct a fighting retreat, move up one of your reserve infantry brigades to lead the next attack. What happens to the morale of the enemy, and you kind of see it on the video that's playing now, is that there is a morale penalty for friendly units. This is AI units, your enemy's units. Each time one of them breaks, it imposes a negative morale effect on the rest of the AI's armies. If you can get several of these brigades to break pretty quickly, and as you move through the line, if they don't have a secondary line of infantry but just artillery, my guess is your skirmishers and dismounted cavalry have already jumped on their artillery and they're routing it. The morale penalties are going to start to stack up on the other enemy infantry and artillery brigades, and it's going to make those fights much shorter. And they're going to likely end up routing. So there is a kind of chain routing effect that sometimes kicks in. That's how you do it. And this video went a bit longer than I wanted to, but I did want to fully go through this with some examples. Again, not perfect examples, but decent enough examples of how you can do this in practice. And I think this video, well, that's showing you casualties. This kind of shows you how it progresses later on. Once we crunk them on our kind of right center, our skirmishers get a nice surround on that one infantry brigade and that other, well, you can't see it on the screen anymore, that other artillery brigade. And then we're able to just move down the line, getting nice 2 and 3v1s against their isolated infantry brigades. And we break them off that way, and eventually the AI decides to signal retreat because at this point they're just losing too much. All right, it went on a while. Hopefully it was worth it. I tried to do this in as painstakingly detail as I can so that you know how you can do this. If you already got it, that's good. If you needed this to overcome some sort of tactical logjam, I hope it helps. Remember, it works all the time, but I'm really looking for tactics that can dig you out of situations where you're outnumbered considerably. And I think that this is one of the ones that has the opportunity to do this. All right, folks, until next time, take care.